Good morning, everybody. It is Tuesday, the 5th of May, all day. This is the Morning Blast. We are back from a long weekend over in the UK. Well, it was a long weekend everywhere, I guess, but some people had Friday off, we had Monday off. As you know, this is the Morning Blast, your very, very candid take on what's going on in markets. Nothing discussed on the podcast is trading or investment advice, and there is no endorsements. If there is, we would be very, very clear about that. Do your own due diligence, etc., etc. Michael, how are we?
Yes, indeed. Very good morning to you, Ryan. Good morning, everyone. Not too bad at all, thank you, mate. Good result for the Arsenal in the football.
Very good result.
So I'm feeling a little bit more optimistic on that front, it must be said.
Yeah, very, very good result. Very good result. It's just a shame that Tottenham are out the relegation zone.
Yeah, well, hopefully they get dragged back into it.
Oh, what a season that would be. We win, they lose, and they get relegated. Lovely jubbly. But anyway, back to markets. It's been a long weekend for us. FTSE's reopened today for the first time in 3 days. Kicking off in the Middle East.
Actually, I need to talk about that because
What?
already I've seen a few people this morning going, why is the FTSE off a cliff? Why are gilts off a cliff?
Oh.
It's just because London was closed yesterday. We are catching down, if you like, to what happened yesterday. The other thing with the FTSE is about half of so FTSE futures was down about 1% when I left the desk 20 minutes ago, whatever it was. About half of that move can also be attributed to HSBC, who missed on their earnings this morning and are obviously, certainly within the top 5 in terms of weightings in the FTSE. So that's acting as a little bit of a drag as well. I know, Ryan and I like to be as bearish on the UK as anyone, but let's stick to the facts. And, the reason the FTSE is down this morning is, for once, nothing political.
Well, and also the FTSE, as we keep saying, isn't really a good gauge on the domestic economy anyway.
No.
The FTSE 100 at least. But yeah, it's very much a catch up. Like we see kind of on the, if there's been a big move in the closing session or closing hours of the US, we'll get a big gap in, or even in Asia, we'll get a big gap in Europe. It's just pronounced because we weren't even here yesterday. But, right, so let's kick off with, obviously, no Clive Lambert. He's still sunning himself.
Oh, of course, he's away, isn't he? I forgot about that.
He's away, yeah. No,
bloody Judith.
Doing his Judith Chalmers impressions. But Middle East, that's kind of...
I would watch a travel show presented by Clive.
Oh, so would I. Absolutely. Middle East, speaking of travel, not that we recommend anyone going over to the Middle East at the moment, but especially as, day 66, 67 in the Thunderdome, also known as Epic Fury. The big news is that Iran struck the UAE with missiles and drones for the first time since early April ceasefire. They did hit a oil refinery in Fallujah. Starting a fire. The US sank several small boats and intercepted Iranian cruise missiles. What's your take on it? Are we is this back to square one, or is this just a little hiccup in your opinion? Obviously, I'm not asking you to tell exactly for sure because no one knows.
Well, quite. And I will say this with the caveat that it is 8:30 in the morning on Tuesday and things could change very, very quickly. But I would say that no, it is not back to square one. I think the reason why I would say that is because of actually what we've heard basically from President Trump, who has not come out and said that the ceasefire has been violated. He has not come out and said, we are going to basically go on the shit out of Iran for doing what they did yesterday, etc., etc. We've not heard any sort of rhetoric of that ilk, which, although clearly the situation on the ground marks an escalation compared to where we were, this time last week, and it marks a deterioration in sentiment more broadly. I think it's also very telling that we haven't heard any more aggressive rhetoric from the US side. And actually, I think the Iranians themselves seem a little bit confused as to exactly what's going on, because there were some reports yesterday that various Iranian military commanders were saying that they actually had no plans to attack the UAE. So I don't really know where this has come from, why it's come now. Is it, the IRGC going a bit rogue? I don't know.
Or factions within the IRGC. It's like, but as we've said before, they've cut so many heads off the snake that it is pretty headless at the moment.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think, that what I would say is, again, just to kind of go back to what we keep trying to do, because, there was so much noise on the headline front yesterday. And admittedly, I wasn't at my desk for the entire day. So, maybe it felt like there was more noise than there actually was because you're following it from your phone or whatever. But if we look at, the situation kind of on the ground, clearly that has got worse. We've got
Yeah.
oil infrastructure that's been hit in Fujairah and it's on fire, etc., etc. We've got, Dubai intercepting missiles and all that kind of stuff. But if we then look at the situation on the diplomatic front, well, there are still talks going on. There are
Yeah.
still proposals being passed backwards and forwards between mediators. We've had no confirmation from either side or even, sources reporting at all from any journalist in the Middle East or anywhere else saying that the talks are breaking down. So, on the one hand, it doesn't look great. Let's be honest, and I think it's logical and understandable that we saw crude benchmarks move higher yesterday. It's understandable that we saw fixed income sell off yesterday, basically in sympathy with that move. But at the same time, has anything, materially changed? Arguably not.
Yeah. I would, you can make a case we are starting to hear of instances of more ships starting to come through the strait. But again, we're like, we're getting all frothy over a couple of ships here. It's like, it's still nowhere near like what it used to be. And
No.
as we've said before, ceasefire, no ceasefire, for the economies of the world, no one really cares. This be very, it might be a bit brutal, but no one really cares what missiles are flying over. All about the economies care about is our ships coming through. And at the moment,
Mm.
that is still for best, this be brutal about that as well. Pretty much the answer is no. A couple of ships getting through isn't moving the dial. One thing that I will flag, because I've not seen it before, is that the UAE and all these Gulf states, etc., have been relying on the US and to an extent Israel to kind of cover their backs and to attack Iran on their behalf. The UAE actually came out yesterday and said that the UAE government themselves would deliver a serious retaliatory response to the missile strikes. Now, that is a slightly different game to what we've been playing so far, because if that does mean that the Gulf nations, obviously, it takes more than one swallow to make a summer. If the if the Gulf nations are going to start fighting back themselves, then yes, it's not a great sign for the Middle East, and the stability of the Middle East.
Mm.
But it does give Trump another reason to back away, because if someone else is going to, pick up the, I was going to say, pick up the pen and run with it, but pick up the bombs and run with them. Yeah, it gives them
Mm.
another option. And also, it gives them a chance to get out of there as quickly as possible and take over Cuba next. But which seems to
Yeah.
be where he
And
wants.
I think
Go on.
the other thing I would say on that, and I don't want to turn this into a geopolitics podcast because we're barely market experts, let alone experts on the 4D chess that goes on there. But it does seem, and if you speak to people in the Gulf, it does seem that the UAE are adopting a different approach to other Gulf states. Let's put it that way, because the UAE have been by far and away the most hawkish of Gulf countries in terms of their rhetoric towards the Iranians in the last 6 to 8 weeks, which I guess is kind of understandable because they're the ones who've borne the brunt of it in terms of missiles being lobbed at them. The other thing is that the UAE have been fairly close, actually very close, with the Israelis throughout the conflict. In fact, the Israelis actually providing the UAE with various missile defense systems for the first time that they've ever been shipped outside of Israel. And also, we know that the UAE's relations with other big players in the Gulf are not as rosy and friendly as they might once have been. They pulled out of OPEC last week, for goodness sake. So, I think we need to be a little bit careful in kind of reading too much from UAE issue a punchy statement to that meaning everyone in the Gulf is feeling the same way. I really don't think that is the case. But I do think you're absolutely right that, in the grand scheme of things, I think President Trump is still, whether you say uninterested, disinterested, bored, fed up, over it, however you want to describe it, all of the public statements that we're getting from the president and all the reporting that we're getting attached to the White House is still of the ilk that, the US just want this over with ASAP and to move on to the next thing, ultimately.
Yeah, no, exactly that. And also, let's not forget we've got midterms coming up as well, which will be weighing heavily on what decisions are being made. But let's move away from
And
the Middle East.
actually, sorry, just
Go
on
on.
that very quickly, it is interesting, I think, that we've increasingly heard from, we heard from Trump, we heard from Bessent over the weekend. They are, again, continuing to hammer this line of, it's okay, gas prices will fall after the war is over. Well, the reason they're saying that is because they're basically saying, please trust us and, but we'll try and buy ourselves a bit of time into the midterms.
Yeah, no, exactly that. Exactly that. Moving away, RBA, the Reserve Bank of Australia, another hike. That's pretty much that's 3 out of 3 Is that 3 hikes on the spin now? It is, isn't it?
Yes, it is. So 3 meetings this year, 3 rate hikes. The cash rate now at 4.35%. That maybe this is just my OCD, but can they just do like a 15 bip hike or a 10 bip cut to get that to a quote unquote normal level, please? Because that's really
Absolutely.
annoying.
Or
But it,
or maybe a 35 cut.
Yeah, just anything to help us out on that one, please. But it was, as you say, the third straight rate hike from the RBA. It was also a much more clear-cut decision than we had last time out.
8-1.
The rate hike that was indeed, and the rate hike that was delivered in March actually came by a 5-4 vote on the board. So a considerably clearer majority in favour of that. This does actually mean that the cash rate in Australia is now back where it was at the peak last cycle. So they have unwound all of the easing that they delivered over the last couple of years. Although the RBA did deliver much less easing than global peers, they did sound a little bit more kind of two-sided and cautious in the policy
Oh,
statement, though.
have we lost Michael Brown?
No, I'm still here. Hello.
Okay. Yep, no, I can hear you.
No, I didn't go anywhere. They were a little bit more two-sided in the policy guidance. They repeated that they're going to do what's necessary in order to achieve their mandate. But Governor Bullock also noted that policy is now, quote, well positioned. So potentially pushing back just a little bit on the idea that they will deliver further rate increases. Although it must be said that if you look at market pricing, money markets continuing to discount further rate hikes from the RBA by the end of the year. In fact, around about 33 basis points of tightening is priced by December. So the market basically saying one and maybe another one in terms of rate
Yeah.
hikes by year end.
I
What I
think,
would say, though,
just quickly
go
on
on.
forecast, I think Westpac as well, they've got 2 more, June and August, they're saying now.
There we go. What I would say, though, is I'm not entirely sure there is much that we can do in terms of reading across from the RBA to other G10 central
No,
banks. The
I
reason I
agree.
say this is because if you look at what was going on in the rest of the world, inflation was gently coming lower over the course of the last kind of 12 months or so before everything kicked off in the Middle East. Labour markets were gradually but surely loosening in the rest of the world as we came into the conflict in the Middle East. Basically, the opposite of both of those statements was true in terms of what's been going on in Australia. So the
Yeah,
RBA are dealing with an economy that's a very, very different kettle of fish to what we see elsewhere. So yes, they've got the cash rate back to where it was at the peak in the last cycle, but they were dealing with issues before conflict in the Middle East started. In fact, they hiked twice before the full implications of this conflict
yeah,
started to become clear. So, before anyone gets excited and goes, oh, the RBA have hiked, it must mean the Fed are going to do the same. No, it doesn't.
yeah, no, exactly that. And that's something definitely to flag. It's not because also, the economy is doing well. That's also why they're hiking. No, it's supply-led inflation and whatnot. Although I will keep saying that you can't print barrels of oil. So we'll see how that one works out for them. Anything else
No,
to
but
add?
Christine Lagarde thinks that interest rates will bring down oil prices. So what could
Oh,
possibly
no,
go wrong?
don't get me started there. Well, do you know what? At least she's taken the other side of my argument, which kind of makes me a lot happier about my argument.
Well,
If
we've
she's
got a
on the other
control
side of it,
variable.
yeah. If she's on the other side of it, you tend to be right. Anything else regarding the RBA, or should we have a quick look at what we got coming up for the week ahead?
No, nothing on the RBA. I did just want to flag two very quick things that came out. Actually, three things that came out on Friday. These are
Oh,
kind of
of
old
course,
news, so
yeah.
I won't dwell on them too much. The first is that President Trump is back issuing tariff threats. He said that he will increase the tariff on EU autos and trucks to 25% starting this week. That is due to the EU not fully complying with the US-EU trade deal. How he's actually going to do that, given that IEPA has been struck down in the Supreme Court, remains to be seen. But that's what he's threatened anyway. And we did see European automaker shares get hit yesterday as a result. The second thing just to bear in mind is, of course, on Thursday, we have that big move in the yen. We suspected that the Ministry of Finance were getting involved. It turned out that they were getting involved. Data out on Friday pointed to an intervention of around 5.5 trillion yen to prop up the currency on Thursday. To put that into something we can all understand, it's about 35 billion US dollars. The Japanese currency diplomat and the finance minister, though, are continuing to refuse to make any comment on FX markets, which is a little bit weird given that it's their job, but there we go. And speaking of weird, we heard from the BOE chief economist Hugh Pill on Friday, my favourite
Yes.
person, who said, and I quote, "Monetary policy shouldn't overreact to short-term volatility." How on earth he can say that with a straight face, having voted for a rate hike on Thursday and been the only one to vote for that rate hike, which is the very definition of overreacting to short-term volatility, I have no idea whatsoever. But
Yeah.
there we are, I suppose.
No, exactly. I'm getting flashbacks to who was it, that economist that was kind of calling for emergency cut just because the S&P was down like 2% a
Oh,
little
the
while back.
fellow was on CNBC.
Yeah,
Yeah, a Siegel.
that's it. Oh, God.
Yeah, we were
Well,
down like 5% for a record, and the Fed need to emergency cut.
yeah, I
Get a
mean,
grip.
come on, man. You can tell you've got no skin in the game if you're kind of calling up for that. Or maybe he has got too much skin in the game. He just was massively offside.
Levered up to his fucking eyeballs is the
Yeah,
problem.
exactly. It's going to be one of the two. So what else we got? So we've got, well, it's Jobs Week.
It is, yes. We've got the jobs report out on Friday. To be honest, the
Obviously,
data docket is...
the more important one being on Wednesday, the
Oh,
ADP
yeah,
number.
the ADP number, yeah, of course,
Uh-huh.
goes without saying. To be honest with you, the data docket is a little bit lighter this week compared to what we had last week. Just to go through it day by day, today we have ISM services data out of the States. That index is expected to fall modestly to 53.7 in April, down from the 54 that we saw in March. Of course, focus will fall not only on the employment component ahead of that jobs report that Ryan mentioned, but also on the prices paid metric as well. In addition to that, we get March job openings and March new home sales data from the US today as well. Moving into Wednesday, of course, we get the ADP figures. We get services PMIs from pretty much everywhere else because of all the bank holidays that we've had. And we also get the quarterly refunding announcement from the US Treasury. What's going to be in focus there is not necessarily the issuance breakdown itself. That's likely to be unchanged, but actually the guidance that the Treasury issue in terms of coming quarters and whether they are looking to further increase coupon sizes as we move through the remainder of the year. Thursday, we've got a couple of policy decisions in Scandinavia, the Riksbank and the Norges Bank, neither expected to change policy, holding rates steady at 1.75% and at 4% respectively. For those of us here in the UK, Thursday is, of course, also election day. We will have local elections in England, so councillors, mayors, etc. We will also have an election in the Scottish Parliament and also in the Welsh Senate as well. Interestingly, this is probably the most interesting thing the BBC have done in about a year. The political editors of the BBC flagged last night that if the SNP win a majority in Scotland, which is looking likely, and if Plaid Cymru become the largest party in Wales, which is also looking likely, that would mean that the three devolved parliaments in the UK, when you add Northern Ireland in as well, are all led by parties that want to break away from the rest of the UK, which doesn't bode particularly well. The other thing, of course, to watch in terms of a much, much shorter term implication is what the hell the result looks like for Labour. It's likely to be pretty grim, and that is obviously going to raise significant questions regarding Prime Minister Starmer's future, which will likely be resolved over the weekend and in the weeks ahead. And then, of course, on Friday, as Ryan rightly alluded to, we do have the jobs report out of the States. Headline payrolls seen rising by about 65,000 in April. That will be a fairly chunky slowdown from the 178 that we saw in March, although that was driven by a number of one-off factors, so some of those unwinding would not be too surprising. Unemployment seen holding steady at 4.3%, and earnings growth seen ticking up a touch to 0.3% on a month-on-month basis. Also on Friday, we get labour market data from Canada and consumer sentiment figures from the US. Amid all of that, earnings season continues. The majority S&P have reported now, but this week we do get notable reports from the likes of AMD. They report after the close today. Disney, they report before the open tomorrow. CoreWeave, they report after the close on Thursday. Plenty of central bank speakers in the mix as well, including the BOE Governor Andrew Bailey, who speaks on Friday. And of course, geopolitics remaining squarely in focus for market participants as well.
Exactly that. Just one note on for those non-UK based listeners on this election on Thursday. So just to be absolutely clear, this isn't members of Parliament that are going to be elected.
No.
This is local councils. Think of it as like local government bodies. But the kind of the view will be taken that Labour, who are looking likely to be absolutely routed, will be it's almost a precursor to what would happen if these
Mm.
were proper elections, because no one really votes in council elections based on the local issues. They always seem to vote just what they would do if it was a national election. That's just how UK politics seems to work these days. And there's a lot
The
of... Sorry, go on.
I was going to say the other thing, just in terms of the local elections, is they are actually so we tend to have a local election every year for various complicated reasons, but this is the biggest set of local elections since the last general election. It's also the biggest set of local elections until the next general election. So
Think of it
it's
as you could think of it as the UK's own version of a midterm.
Yeah, effectively, that is the way it is.
And it'll be, and again, because Starmer's under so much pressure, as soon as this result comes in, there will be a lot of clocks that start, and that'll be when we start seeing a lot of, if we are going to get any kind of moves on Starmer's position, it will be as soon as these elections have finished and being counted. It feels like there's a lot of ducks lined up. They've just been waiting for this moment, so it probably, most likely, will be a very busy couple of weeks in UK politics after Thursday. So definitely want to keep an eye on there. Anything else that we've mentioned, or not mentioned, rather?
No, I think that is it, mate.
I think that's it. Yeah, well, let's stop while we're ahead, sort of. Listeners?
Actually, sorry,
Go on,
there is
go on,
one
go on.
more thing. The only thing I would say, just on the local elections, again, and we'll cover this on Thursday, of course, but in a difference to a general election, we won't know the results straight away. There's a lot of counting that needs to go on. A lot of that counting doesn't actually start until the next day anyway, so it's going to take 2 or 3 days to fully discover the entire fallout from those polls. So don't expect to wake up Friday morning and see headlines saying bloodbath for Labour, whatever. That's a little bit too early.
I mean, we'll get exit polls, but because it is so intensely watched. But it basically, think of it as a lot of old people counting tickets. That's what basically the process.
I mean, that is what it is, actually, to be honest.
Exactly. I've got nothing against old people, but it's like volunteers that are kind of putting their names forward to manually count tickets, and that's pretty much what it is.
And if you've got the time to volunteer to do that for free, you probably are an old person. That's just the reality.
Or a Labour voter. A non-working Labour voter. There you go.
Or both.
Anyway, moving swiftly on from those work-shy bastards. Michael, thank you as always. Listeners, thank you as always.
Well, we can say what we want about them. They're not going to be listening to this, are they?
Well, exactly. They'll still be in bed or down the spoons. But anyway, before I get booted off air, thank you as always. Good to be back after a long weekend. And we'll see you all tomorrow. Much love.
Bye for now.
Bye for now.